Hey guys, in this video we're going to talk about something called a congruence marking, and it's going to build off of that last video that we just did. So in our last video we talked about congruent statements, and congruence markings, all they are their ways to mark on a figure different parts of two different figures that are congruent to one another. So like I'm going to draw in here the two triangles that are on the slides. We have triangle ABC, and we have triangle DEF. ABC, and this one is DEF. Yep, DEF. And we are told, we are given this piece of information. We are given that ABC is congruent to DEF. And from this congruence statement, we can actually write all the other congruent statements. We can say angle A, that's going to be congruent to angle D. And we can say angle B, well, that's going to be congruent to angle E. And we can say angle C, well, that's going to be congruent to angle F. And we know all this because the order that they're written in, they are the corresponding parts. We also can go further and do line AB. This line segment is congruent to AB, is going to be DE, so to segment DE. Then segment BC should go with EF. And then we can do CA last. And CA is going to be congruent with FD. These are the corresponding sides. And this is all we did yesterday, was from this statement, figure out what corresponds, what goes together, because when you have two congruent figures, their angles are going to be congruent, the corresponding angles will be congruent, and the corresponding sides will be congruent. And we also did some where maybe you had the figures and you just had a mark, and you just had to make these from the figures. Today we're going to talk about how to mark it now. So let's say we have angle A and angle D, and from this congruence statement, this was given to us, we can conclude that angle A is congruent to angle D. So when I say mark it, all we're going to do is on the figure, we're going to say angle A, angle D. We're going to put a little arc here on both of them. We're going to do 1 for each one, meaning that they go together. A and D are congruent. Since B goes with E, I'm going to go down to B. And instead of putting 1, because if I put 1, that would mean that B is also congruent to A and D. But we don't know if B is congruent to A or D. It doesn't say that up here. So I'm going to put 2. To differentiate between them. So B is not congruent to A, but it is congruent to E over here. So everything with 2 markings is congruent to one another. And then C goes with F. So since those two are just congruent to each other, they would have 3. So everything with 3 markings would be congruent as well. So these are the angle markings to mark congruence. To mark sides, so AB goes with DE, AB goes with DE. You're just going to put a little line through it, a little dash through it like that. So 1 dash, those sides go together. BC goes with EF. So because we want to differentiate and not put 1, 1 would mean these two are congruent, but they're not. So we're going to put 2 here. And we'll put 2 because the 2's will go together. And then we'll put 3 markings on the other sides that go together. CA goes with FD. So we'd have 3 markings. These are all called congruence markings. And you can mark them right on figures, or maybe you'll be given a figure like this, and you have to figure out all of this information from what's marked on it. This will help you when it comes to finding missing sides. We're still in the stage of just identifying what parts go together, what parts are congruent that have the same measure, because that'll be really important in what we do in the next few days. So let's look at an example where we're going to be given 2 figures with the markings, and we have to write the congruent statements. So here's our 2 figures. They look like this. They're both quadrilaterals. One is labeled with MNOP, and the other is labeled with AB, S, and K. And I'm going to put some markings in here. So this has 1, this has 1, this has 2, this has 2, this has 3, 3, this side has 4, and this side has 4. And color code the interior, we have an angle like this, an angle like this, this, and then we have these little boxes down here. If you don't know what the boxes mean, they represent right angles. So they have a special marking for right angles. They use a little box like this. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's do the sides first for this one. So if we look, I'm going to look right here to MP, that side, MP, we want to figure out what that's congruent to. Well, MP, if you look over here, the other side with one marking is going to be AS. So MP goes with AS. Let's say we go down to the bottom here, PO. Well, that's going to go with the SK over here. And I put the P first, or I put the S first here because I put the P first here. The P went with the S on this one as well. Now we have O to N going right here, which is going to be K to B. So I'll put the K first, KB. And then we have N going to M. It's our last side, which would be B going to A. So these are all the sides that correspond, which means these are the sides that are congruent. And then we can also list our congruent angles. So right away, I know angle M goes with angle A. They both have one marking. Angle N goes with angle B. So they're going to be congruent. They both have two markings. And then if you look down here, well, we have four angles that are all right angles. They all have the marking. So we know they're all going to be congruent to each other. We know P is going to be congruent to O, K, and S. They all are right angles. But I'm going to go one step further, and I'm going to identify what corresponds with each other. And I know that O corresponds with K here. And the reason why I know that, I'm going to look into these sides. The side with 3 markings here and 2 markings, those two sides, they make this right angle, and that's point O. If you go to the other figure, the side with 3 markings and 2 markings, they make this right angle K. So O is going to go with K. I'm using the sides to figure out what angles go together. And then we also know that angle S, or over here, is made by the marking with 1, or the side with 1 marking, and the side with 2 markings. So if you go over to this side, the side with 1 marking and the side with 2 markings, they make angle P. So angle P is going to go with angle S. So you can use the sides to figure out which angles go together, but all of these angles are actually congruent to each other. So you could write it like this if you wanted to. You could write one statement. I like to put that extra one down there like I just had, just so I know what corresponds with each other, because that's going to help with writing the last part. And the last part, will go in red, is just listing the final congruent statement. So I'm going to say MNOP. MNOP, whenever you're listing polygons, you just go around, you don't like go across. So MNOP, and I can use these right here. M goes with A, so it's going to be congruent to A. N goes with B. O went with the K, and the P went with S. So MNOP goes with ABKS. Those two polygons are congruent, and these are all your congruent statements. Okay, our next one, we have triangles now. And this one we're going to have to do some congruency markings. So here we have a triangle like this, and a triangle like this. And we have DOG, triangle dog, triangle HAT, triangle hat. And we are told, this is really important here, we are told that DOG, say triangle DOG, is congruent to triangle HAT. So we're given this information. Since we're given that information, we can conclude that D goes with H, so angle D is congruent to angle H. So angle D, I'm going to mark it, is congruent to angle H. Angle O is congruent to angle A. So angle O, put 2 markings, is congruent to angle A, and angle G is congruent to angle T, so G is congruent to T. And here's all of your congruent statements for the angles. Here's all the markings right there. And let's go in green. Let's do the sides. I'll put them down here. DO, so that segment DO is going to be congruent to A or HA. So DO will be congruent to HA. They both get 1 marking. OG, that is going to be congruent to AT. So OG, I'll put 2 markings here. We'll go with AT. I'll put 2 markings. And then lastly, we have GD. And that will be congruent with TH. Following our statement, GD would be TH. So GD, down here on the bottom, we get 3. TH, we get 3. So here's your congruent statements, and these are the correct markings for your 2 triangles. Sometimes it might be kind of hard to tell what corresponds with each other, especially if there was like a reflection. But this statement up here in purple, that's always going to tell you what corresponds. So always fall back on this. Other times it might get confusing and you don't want to confuse different parts. So always fall back on that statement. That's verifying everything for you. All right, our last one here. We have, again, 2 figures with markings already given, and we are going to write statements from the markings. Draw them nice and big. So we have SVT, and we have MNO. NO. And these are the markings that are given to us. 1, 2, and 3. And we have these angles marked as well. Looks like this. So let's go ahead and write some congruent statements. I'm going to start with the angles. Angle S over here. Well, S has 1 marking, so look for an angle with 1 marking down here. That would be the N. So angle S is congruent with angle N. Angle T, that's going to be congruent with angle M. And angle V has 3, that goes with angle O. So you might notice with this, the T, after whatever transformation it was, ended up on the left side. So this actually is like a reflection of the 2 triangles. And let's look at our sides now. Let's start with VS. You can use the figures, but I like to use the statements that you already wrote. VS would be ON. So segment VS goes with ON. You can double check. VS, ON, they both have 1 marking. Let's do ST next. So ST goes with MN. So NM, ST, and N, they both have the 2 markings. And then we'll do TV at the end. So TV would go with MO. And then you do TV. MO, they both have 3 markings, so that looks good. And our last statement would be to write the final. We have 2 triangles here, so triangle STV is going to be congruent to triangle NMO. And that would be your final congruent statement. So again, it's all about identifying what parts correspond with each other, because in congruent figures, corresponding parts are congruent. Knowing which parts are congruent is going to help us with finding missing measurements in the future. All right, so go ahead and practice some of these on your own, and have a nice day.